and welcome to Solving Climate Change Once and for All. I'm Bihuye, and thank you so much for joining this online series where we're talking to experts and entrepreneurs to learn what from their work we can apply to climate action and, more importantly, to climate justice. You'll leave with the one key thing you can do to make a positive impact. We're very lucky today to be joined by Joel Makower. He is the guru of green business practices, the Associated Press's words, not mine, the co-founder, chairman, and executive editor of GreenBiz Group Inc, and for more than 30 years has been a respected voice on business, the bottom line, and the environment. He's written over a dozen books, advises both for-profit and nonprofit organizations on sustainability, and he has hugely important insight on how businesses play a critical role in our climate fight. And he's here to share it today with us. Hi, Joel, and welcome.
Thanks, Bea. Great to be here.
Great to have you. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. Can you share more about the day you started your work as a journalist and, what were the tipping points from that point on that allowed you to take the leap of faith into entrepreneurship and founding GreenBiz?
Yeah, I am a journalist by training, and I studied journalism in school. Not because I necessarily wanted to be a journalist, but because I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to be if I grew up. And my hypothesis was that under the guise of sticking my nose in other people's business and writing about it, I'd find something that I was good at and interested in and synced with my values and lifestyle and whatever else. And for the first 15 years, turns out that what I was good at and synced with all those things was just sticking my nose in other people's business and writing about it. But there were two things going on. I'm going to really date myself here when I was in journalism school. One was Watergate, which was journalists as truth tellers and dragon slayers. And the other was Ralph Nader, the consumer advocate, not the election destroyer of 2000, but the Nader's Raiders and the whole consumer movement that he really, not sure started, but certainly accelerated. And that was interesting to me too, because it was sort of every man as truth teller and educator and sticking up for everyday people kind of thing, and taking on the big companies that didn't have the kind of accountability they needed. So I started my career as a consumer writer, but you asked me about that leap to entrepreneurship. I never really had, a job. I'm self-employed pretty much since I got out of school in the mid-'70s. I had a summer internship that I stuck around there for a while. This was in Washington, D.C., became a freelance writer. Being a freelance writer, ended up with a book idea in like 1980, 81 about the health effects of office environments. Because back at the time we were sealing up buildings and running the air conditioning less and bringing in all these synthetic materials, and then personal computers, which were coming out about that time. And it was changing the nature of office work, making these unhealthy environments. It's what later became well buildings and green buildings, right, and ergonomics and a whole bunch of other things. But through that, I really realized that to understand consumer issues, you really needed to understand business. And so that's where I really leaned in, is understanding what companies were going through and how they operate. And so when I had the chance in 1989 to write a book called The Green Consumer, in the run up to Earth Day 1990, so 30 years ago, it was just really sort of started to come together. But then I quickly realized that after I wrote a book, I was initially anointed as an expert on this topic by whoever, and very quickly had a weekly syndicated newspaper column in about 90 papers called The Green Consumer. Wow. And was preaching the gospel that every time you open your wallet, you cast a vote for or against the environment. Mm-hmm. And the marketplace isn't a democracy. It doesn't take 51% of people voting to make a difference. This is before I knew that it didn't take 51% of people voting in a democracy either, but that's another story. And then I realized two things. One, there was no real green consumer movement in the United States. Mm-hmm. And two, that the companies I was being asked to come in and talk to about so-called green consumers were themselves grappling with a whole bunch of issues around energy, water, waste, toxicity, carbon intensity, things like that. And didn't really have a lot of places to turn. So that's where I really started a monthly newsletter, what we would now call a dead tree snail mail newsletter called the Green Business Letter, and then eventually a website, and that grew into GreenBiz Group, the company that I co-founded, that does events and media and research and has a membership group of sustainability executives from big companies. So sorry, that's a long answer to a short question, but it sort of has been this journey. And, you know, I have to say I stuck with it for 30 years. And, you know, people now say, well, how did you know? And it's like, well, I didn't really have any other good ideas. And I remember sitting there one day in my office, going back to that original hypothesis of why I wanted to study journalism. And I just remember that moment, and I said, holy crap, I found it. I'm home.
Wow.
This is what I was looking for.
That's an amazing journey. And personally, to see kind of your fingerprints on all of these different movements and concepts that have shaped my worldview on business and their ability to shape sustainability and the way that we are tackling climate change and the climate crisis, that's really awesome. And thank you for all the leadership that you've dedicated to the industry for so long.
Yeah.
I think in a very similar vein, through my career, which has been focused on energy as the lever in this fight, I've seen a huge oversight on climate justice. So the same way that you basically said, hey, there's no green consumer movement and there are all these gaps, right? I see that with climate justice and kind of making it a human problem. So I'm curious how you look at climate justice, and also why do you think it's so easily ignored?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you know, companies paid lip service under the guise of corporate social responsibility to communities and their customers and their employees and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't looking at everything about their communities. They may have been looking at some issues around homelessness and things like that, but they didn't necessarily look at what we now call frontline communities, those who were most impacted by some of the issues that they were frankly causing and trying to address in a responsible way. But I think they've come along, and I see big changes now where companies realize that, frankly, you can't have a healthy company in an unhealthy society. You need to have, and healthy in every sense of that word, not just public health, but financial health, the social fabric, equity, inclusion, everything that we now talk about when we talk about climate justice, right, and environmental justice. And I think they've realized, through the good work of activist organizations, primarily, of calling attention to the challenges, the fact that people of color or people in marginalized communities are disproportionately affected, just as they are now with coronavirus. Right. And so a lot of this stuff is now becoming second nature. We've heard messages from people like Van Jones who said, no throwaway resources, and there should be no throwaway people. Mm-hmm. And work of Green for All, how do we build an economy that works for everyone? And that includes not just every people, but every critter and species, but also, works for us at every level. And so I'm not saying that companies are doing everything they need to be doing, not by a long shot, but I do think there is this awareness now that is something they need to pay attention to. I think companies grapple with how to do that and aren't sure exactly what kinds of resources. I think that's kind of scary to them as well. Mm-hmm. But at least I believe that awareness is getting there, and that makes me hopeful.
Definitely. And I think that shift in the mainstream to understanding sustainability, seeing it as something people need to prioritize and that consumers are demanding, has definitely happened. It's interesting also to think about how a large part of our work in sustainability as thought leaders, or even just as individuals, peer-to-peer, you spend so much time creating a foundational understanding. Are we talking about the same thing? Do we agree that climate change is an issue? And I see you as sort of the expert of how do you handle that debate when it's a debate of facts? How do you contend with that?
Yeah, and it's funny because companies have the same problem internally. We talk about the fact that the chief sustainability officer, of which there is some version of that, whether that's their title or not, in most big companies and a lot of smaller ones, really are chief translation officers. That they have to take the language of regulators or environmentalists around carbon pollution and and translate it into the KPIs, the key performance indicators, the metrics of business, and understand of what this means, and how this affects operations both positively and negatively, but also the risks associated with not dealing with this. And so I think a lot of this, this idea of translation and foundational knowledge is critical, because this is complicated stuff. It's science. It's made more complex by the deniers and naysayers who have thrown out a lot of bad information that just has muddied the waters. And it's not, for most people, their number one priority, and it's certainly not for companies their number one priority. So how do we make this work? How do we make this understandable, accessible? How do we engage people at every level in whatever ways it's possible? There was a book that came out at the same time as my book, The Green Consumer, in 1990. It was a much bigger, mine did quite well, but this was a number one, I think, paperback bestseller at the time, called 50 Simple Things You Can Do to Change the World, Change the Earth. Wow. Excuse me, 50 Simple Things You Can Do to Save the Earth. It was a real phenomenon. It made the evening news, and it was a big deal. Well, it turns out there aren't 50 simple things you can do to save the earth. There's probably 5 really challenging, hard things, and we all sort of know what they are around driving and meat, and getting regulators and congressional and legislators and other politicians involved, and understanding, and all the things that voting with your dollars, which is still a good idea, even though most people don't do it. And so that's the challenge: is how do you take these incredibly complex things and make them accessible? And the answer, at least at the high level, is storytelling. If you think about it, this stuff we're talking about is on one level, it's incredibly cerebral. It's science and engineering and data and all these things that are pretty complex. About even the experts who agree that there's a problem don't necessarily agree on the nature of the problem.
Right. On
the other hand, it's about our bodies and our families and our communities and our future. So it's head and heart. And I'm sure if you lean too far in either direction, it's either I don't understand it, it's just over my head, versus sort of the, oh my God, it's sort of so California woo woo. And I say that, we're two proud Californians. And so storytelling is how we integrate head and heart. It's how we, throughout the history of our species, have shared information, passed along knowledge and myths. And I think it's the best way we know how to engage people. And so the question is how do we do that better? All of us, not just the people in media, not just the people in power. It's neighbor to neighbor, shopkeeper to customer, parent to child, child to parent. It's peer to peer. How do we learn those stories and understand them better so that we can share them and create this image of what's possible?
And what I love about that is everybody can be a storyteller. You don't have to have a PhD in environmental science in order to understand and then translate, as you said, the whole storyline and history of how we got to where we are today, right? But you can make it super personal. You can make it meaningful to your entry point into this world and what you then want to do about it. So that's an awesome, really empowering kind of advice point for everybody to think through. Speaking of framing, I'd love to talk about activism a little bit. I think it's a bit of a loaded word. When companies hear activist, they might freeze up and think, okay, well, they can't be a representation or extension of our brand because we don't have a stance in that policy fight right now. And when you talk to an activist, however we define that, they often look at companies and vilify them because they're not doing enough or using their resources effectively for those marginalized parts of the population, especially, right? So I'd love to unpack that dynamic a little bit. And you've written a lot about when it comes to being sustainable, how companies are in fact doing a lot. They've come so far. Um, can you kind of help think about, again, those opposite ends of the spectrum and how we build that bridge a little bit more when we
Sure.
know activism is important?
Yeah, and you started, the premise of the question was that, companies don't like activists, activists don't like companies. And that's probably true at the general level, but actually the people inside companies who are engaging, who lead the sustainability efforts, they actually kind of like activists in a certain way. It's funny that for years, I used to, when I'd hear about a company doing something really interesting, when they tell me something that just say, wow, that's the kind of thing you'd say wow to, or that's pretty cool, I'd ask them, what's driving you? What's driving that thing? Why are you doing it? And for a long time, the answer more often than not was either Walmart or Greenpeace. And both companies were kicking the butts of both of those organizations were kicking the butts of companies and saying, you need to be doing these things if you want to be our supplier. You need to be doing these things, or we're going to be, rappelling off your building and hanging signs, whatever it was. And yeah, they may not always like the tactics, but that activists bring to companies. But they actually, some of the CSOs, the sustainability officers, were saying, thank you. They wouldn't say it publicly, but they'd say, thank you. I've been trying to get my company to pay attention to that thing you're talking about for years. And thank you for bringing it to a higher level than I was able to do. Having said that, there's two issues, one on each side, that I think is important. One is that companies do get fearful, and they often, oh my God, Greenpeace called, what do we do? And they don't respond. Please don't, whatever you do, don't respond. So just kind of, if you engage, it's going to be, problem. And I've learned that's not the case. And there are some sustainability executives. The best one I can is the guy named Bob Langert, who was the head of sustainability at McDonald's for close to 30 years. Wow. And his philosophy was engage with everybody who's a critic. And of course, everybody was a critic of McDonald's. He ended up going down on a rafting trip in the Amazon with Greenpeace, with Greenpeace written on the side of the raft.
Wow.
To learn about, I think it was soy farming or something that was going on that was part of their supply chain. And, they ended up being, whatever you think of McDonald's or their food, they ended up changing the industry standard on animal welfare. They ended up swearing off rainforest beef in the 80s, I think, or the early 90s, and a whole range of other things because they would listen. And so I encourage companies, listen, engage. You're not going to get anywhere by stonewalling. On the activist side, there's, and you alluded to this, there's this tendency to just say, whatever companies do, and companies are doing a lot. Companies are actually doing a lot more than they're talking about. And we can talk about that if you want, but when companies do talk about what they're doing, the activists say, not good enough. And you can tweak that a little bit. And the sentence that I would like them to say is actually 2 sentences and 5 words. Thank you. Now do more. Because what happens is when a company does something, reduces the single-use plastics or makes some commitment around carbon or whatever it is, there's hundreds of things, literally. And immediately gets shut down by an activist group that says, nah, that's not good enough. That's bull. The person who inside that company who led that initiative, or the team who led that initiative, sometimes taking years to push that forward to that senior management and the board of directors or whatever bought into that, all they get is, so we finally announced this and all we got was criticism by activists. Why are we even bothering? And yet a little bit of, wow, that's great. Thank you for doing that. It's not enough, but thank you for doing that. Now do more. Is a much better message in terms of giving companies that do take action the props they need to get the buy-in and get some wind under their sails. And I would just love to see that conversation happen more.
Thank you. Now do more. I love it. And I think it's interesting you bring up, why aren't companies doing more? Is it because it's often received with criticism?
Well, companies are doing a lot more than they're saying, as I said a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that they're walking more than they're talking. And I'll tell you why. There's really three reasons why that's so. One is that most of what companies are doing fall in the category of doing less bad, right? It's, we suck less than we used to, 42% less than we did 2 years ago, carbon or toxics or water use or whatever it is. And that's hard to sell. That's hard, in a marketing point of view. It's hard to say we suck less than we used to. So that's number one. Number two is that most of what they do is not part of the value proposition of what they sell. So for example, pretty much every car manufacturer, but I know GM and Ford really led this, GM I know has about 150 facilities around the world, and most of them overwhelmingly are zero waste. Nothing goes to landfill. And certainly all the manufacturing assembly plants, nothing goes to waste, and nothing goes to landfill. And that's an amazing feat. And it's a big environmental improvement. And by the way, they're saving tens of millions of dollars a year from reduced disposal fees or reselling corrugated cardboard into the market or whatever it is. But it's not something they're going to advertise in a Chevy showroom. And that gets to the third point. The minute they started talking about that, whether it's in the showroom or whatever, they risk somebody saying, how dare you talk about zero waste factories when you make cars with internal combustion engines? And that gets to the third point, which is that when you talk about what you're doing right, you often either illuminate problems that people, or sometimes problems that the public didn't know you have. I'll tell you a quick story about that. A number of years ago, I heard that Levi Strauss, which at the time was the largest cotton buyer in the world, had started sourcing 2% of their annual cotton by organically. And you didn't need to be a journalist to say, hey, that's cool. That's an interesting story. And I wanted to write about what are they doing? Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? All the kinds of things we like to cover on GreenBiz. And they didn't want to talk about it. And I persevered, and I knew people, and over some weeks, I finally got them to talk with me about it. And one of the first questions I asked them is, so why don't you want to talk about it? And they said, well, look at it from our perspective. When we go out to tell the story, we have to explain that cotton is one of the toughest crops to grow in terms of water inputs and fertilizer and pesticides and the groundwater runoff and how that affects worker health and safety and the birds and the trees. We risk the public saying, so you mean 98% of what you buy is bad for people on the planet? Why only 2%? Why not 5? We're going to do campus boycotts so you commit to 10% organic cotton. And at the time, they didn't even know whether they could sustain 2% because there wasn't enough of a supply. And so it was, and now they're way past that, and they're still, but a lot of other companies, Gap and Nike and others it's a sort of a horse race to who can source the most organic cotton. It's a great race to the top. But this is the problem, is when you talk about what you're doing right, you often illuminate problems that you don't necessarily want to talk about.
So have you found a mechanism to encourage companies to have more courage to talk about what they're doing right and take the risk that it will invite more criticism? But then again, to your point about, balancing that with activists saying, I see the progress, I thank you for it, we still need more.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ways companies can do it. First of all, a lot of it, it depends on what's driving this. So different things, different companies are driven by different things. Sometimes it's peer pressure, it's competitive pressure. The other companies are doing it, so we need to do it too. Sometimes it's activist pressure. Increasingly, it's investor pressure. Wall Street is now leaning in on companies on a lot of these issues. Sometimes it's just a culture of innovation. Sometimes it's the CEO's legacy. Sometimes the CEO's kids have been bugging them or her, and they wake up one morning and say, this is not right the way we're doing this. We need to change. I've seen companies where that's the case. You never know what's going to be driving it. So that's a factor. And so the company does this authentically, where it's really owned by senior management, obviously are going to have a better time, not just talking about it, but also keeping that, as you call it, courage up, where they can take the criticism and saying, it's okay, we know this is the right thing to do, and we're never going to be perfect, and people may not appreciate it, but we are on this journey. I think where it becomes a problem for companies is when it sort of comes out of the blue and it doesn't sound like the voice you've heard them talk, the way they normally speak to the public or the marketplace, and it's a little jarring. So there is a way of, and by the way, when a company does do something significant, who's standing next to them? Have they engaged nonprofits, activists, or lots of nonprofits that aren't activists but are still, the groups that sort of play both sides, EDF and WWF and NRDC and others. Who's standing next to them? Is it based on science? Is it, they have specific, is it a big enough goal? Is the science based on goal? Is it a target that everyone understands that's the right target? Mm-hmm. Do they have, timetables? Is it not mid-century when no one's going to be around, or is it going to be in the next, what are they doing by 2025, 2030? Yeah. In the meantime, even to get to the big goal in the mid-century. So that's how you do it. There's no easy thing, but it does take some building blocks.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting in that is you need it to be authentic. It can't just look authentic. It can't just sound authentic. To your point, who did you work on to co-create this solution, to put out this initiative? And I'm curious, in terms of activism, we've seen a lot of the employees kind of rally around climate action further, faster, and try to give that courage or that pressure back to their employers. With the Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, we've seen just kind of a mainstream shift to companies thinking about sustainability and what they can do in their operations. I'm wondering, do you think that is a trend that will continue? How that might change, or is it kind of just a blip because it's more mainstream now and that's what people are latching onto?
No, I feel very much like a trend. And it's a very powerful trend. Companies need the next generation of employees, to recruits. And if you don't want to work for that company, they're going to have a hard time. There are a number of efforts now to engage both college students and early career and even some mid-career to take a stand. There's a group called Climate Voice that launched back in, I think, in March. Created by a guy called Bill Weil, who was formerly the head of sustainability at Facebook, and before that was the energy czar, his actual title at Google. And the idea is how do you get and leverage exactly what you're talking about, the employees in companies or job recruits who are about to go into the job market, to say, I only want to work for companies that are taking these kinds of actions, that have made these kinds of commitments. And companies, listen, when you show up at a college campus and you don't get as many people coming to talk to your recruiters as you used to, and maybe you've even heard why, that gets back to the C-suite very quickly. And so and whether it's employees or job seekers, so what's happening in Amazon and a few other companies, mostly in the tech sector, I think, they're taking a page from what we saw with LGBT movement back when North Carolina and Indiana and some other states passed some silly laws around bathrooms. I mean, stupid laws around bathrooms and things like that. And employees said, we don't want to go to those states. We don't want to set up new server farms or offices in those states. The NCAA said, let's move the Final Four championship from Charlotte to somewhere else. And all of a sudden, those states, as seemingly, hard, steadfast on their commitments to discriminate, backtracked and said, no, this is not good for us. And so there's a powerful voice there that employees recognize that they have inside those companies to persuade their companies to take bold stands in some cases on social and now environmental issues. And I think we're trying to replicate that model and propagate it in the age of climate change.
That's a great teaser. We have Bill Weil being interviewed as part of our series. So I think connecting that point of the spectrum that you've unpacked for us, right? Companies that want to do more, but might fear that it will uncover more of their weaknesses, and activists who expect more and might not be able to kind of create that pressure or encourage the courage that we want companies to have to meet in the middle. So I want to shift to talking about mindset a little bit. I think in the sustainability industry as a profession, or just as an eager individual, it is coming from a place that is a little bit of a limiting paradigm, right? It all started with conservation, use less, reduce, reuse. And I think that that has limited a lot of the shift towards what we're seeing now, which is regeneration. How can we not just do more with less, but think about all the other dimensions of social impact that can come from the work that we're doing, particularly around humans, and back to kind of the central topic of climate justice. So can you share how you've seen companies, or just in your own mindset, kind of shift from that beginning point of conservation now to something a lot more impactful, regeneration?
Yeah, well, we've seen this continuum, and starting off with stopping the bad stuff, which even if it was legal, but the drain pipes and dumpsters and smokestacks, and then it got into the realm of doing well by doing good, which is how do you do some things that save money and also get you some reputational value. And then it became, well, it's not just about improving the bottom line. How do we grow the top line? How does sustainability become an engine for innovation and new products and services? And that's the whole clean tech movement. Now it's a clean economy, and we're seeing that evolve. And then now to this point of, well, how do we not just, do less bad, but how do we do more good? How do we actually be an engine for regeneration, taking out more carbon from the atmosphere than we emit, for example, or taking more waste out of the waste stream, or materials out of the waste stream than we put into it. And that's a really interesting thing. And by the way, any given company could be at all four parts of that continuum. They can be looking at those regeneration kinds of things and still grappling with some of the basic smokestack and dumpster things, particularly obviously in the industrial sector. So it's not you stop one and move on to the next. And that's one of the challenges, is how do we determine who's a good company? Because a company may be doing this amazing stuff over here, but still dealing with these usually legacy issues, or sometimes just still sort of bad corporate behavior over here. But the point is that we've gone from this era or we're in the process of going from this era of companies doing, inadvertently harming the environment to deliberately helping the environment. And it's not a light switch. We don't switch from one to the other. It's a process that's still very much undergoing. But I think that's a really interesting era. There's something else that goes alongside that, B, which I think is really also important. It's another flipping the switch, if you will, which is that we've gone from an era of what is business doing to ruin the environment, or let's just deal with climate, to what's the environment doing to ruin business? And so it's become a risk-based conversation that Wall Street gets, senior management gets increasingly. That risk is really one of the big issues here, is that, how do you start to look at, how do you operate in a world where energy, water, carbon, toxicity, carbon intensity become constraints, and resource constraints abound? How do you turn that into an opportunity? How does that to create more efficient or alternative bio-based kinds of things, regenerative kinds of products and services, circular economy kinds of things, and that's becoming an engine for catalyst, but it's born not out of doing well by doing good or saving the earth. It's about risk, plain and simple.
Yeah, that's a fascinating insight that I think really, back to your point about translating, puts it in the vernacular of business and institutions, and the way that they're looking at it from, this is my core competency, this is my core business. We have to understand the risk, or we aren't here to save the planet. We're here to run a business, right? And redefining what that means. That's a super interesting kind of mental shift from conservation to, this is about our business and how we keep it going.
And by the way, we still do want to address some of the planet's biggest environmental and social issues. So it's not that we don't care about saving the planet. It's that we need to do it through the lens of the products and services that we offer, through the customer base that we have, and can grow and change and shift to other kinds of customers. But as you said, through the lens of business. And we are in the business of making and selling things. And how do we do that in a way that creates this regenerative approach to business that companies are just now starting to discover?
Right, absolutely. I think as a veteran in the sustainability industry, something I'm interested in hearing about your mindset is where you derive hope. I mean, there's so much evolution that you've seen. We go one step forward, 10 steps back overnight with the change of an administration. Entire agencies can be dissolved, and there's a lot of ups and downs, roller coaster. And I assume that hope is part of your equation for coping with all of that. But I'm also curious kind of what makes up your mindset as you've seen so much change in the roller coaster of this industry.
Well, being in sustainability is an inherently optimistic profession. We get out of bed every morning thinking about possibilities, thinking about solving problems, thinking about what's possible, thinking about moonshots. And so, you kind of have to be positive to be optimistic to be in this field. And yet, how do you maintain that given all that we see going on the planet and the politics and everything else? And so what gives me hope? I mean, there's lots of different answers to that. Certainly the youth movement gives me hope. Entrepreneurs give me hope. What's going on Wall Street gives me hope. But what really gives me hope are the people on the front lines in sustainability inside companies. Because one of the most remarkable things I've seen is the fact that despite not just the lack of leadership from Washington, but the absolute turning back, as you said, of environmental regulations and things, how much companies have not taken their foot off the accelerator in their quest to be sustainable and to bring forth these innovations and technologies and business models. That has not only continued, but it's accelerated over the past couple of years. And that gives me big hope, great hope. And why are they doing that? Well, there's lots of reasons, as I said before, and some of that's because of activists who are leaning on companies. And it doesn't really matter what the motivation is. I don't care whether they're doing it because they were forced to, or because of Greenpeace, or because they just see billions of dollars of revenue there. It's all good, right? As they say. And what's really, the motivation is less critical than what they're actually doing. And so I'm not, such naive enough or Pollyannish enough to say that companies on the case and they're doing all they can do, and there's nothing to see here. Let's go look over there. There's a lot to do, and most companies have still just scratched the surface. But despite the fact that they could easily have said, we don't have to pay attention to that environmental stuff anymore, the government doesn't care, they are not stopping. In fact, there's this whole "we are still in" movement. Hundreds of companies, including lots of big ones, who, when Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, said, no, we are still in. Right. And cities and governors and others have joined them. That's what gives me hope, is that this is not, and then the next generation of job seekers and employees who are now stepping up and standing up and speaking up. And I think that gives me a lot of hope. I've been waiting for when the young generations, the millennials and Gen Z and others, were going to get pissed. We're going to, we're going to get out on the street and saying, how dare you steal my future?
Yeah.
I didn't understand it. I grew up in the Vietnam War era, and we were all touched by the draft, if not the war, and we did that, and it was nowhere near as existential as climate change. And so I'm heartened by the fact that credit Greta Thunberg, or credit hundreds or thousands of other young people around the world who have leaned into this. That gives me hope.
Absolutely. And I think we're pissed, and we're demanding more. But I think to take your lesson is to acknowledge what has been done, to invite more of that action is really something that has already resonated with me. I know this next question is not your favorite, and I think it's interesting because one of the things that give you hope is the people within companies that are driving this change. And that's really where I spent my career, looking at big energy players in oil and gas and seeing, can we shift them to alternative fuels, alternative business models, working within big utilities, trying to evolve and transform their business models so that they wouldn't become outmoded. And in all of that, I still saw that climate justice was not being addressed, right? That because of all of these reasons you've laid out, that makes sense. It is about core competencies. It is about business. It's about risk management. And climate justice just hasn't entered into that dialogue yet. And so my question is, as we promised to our listeners, what's kind of the one key thing that we can do to further climate justice specifically?
Well, engaging companies directly, I think, is key. And there's a tendency they want to go to the C-suite. Let's get the CEO and let's get her or his attention and make a lot of noise or whatever it is till they can't ignore us. And that works sometimes. But also, as I was saying before about how a lot of this stuff bubbles up from the lower ranks, is engage, figure out what's the insertion point. If it's a local plant of a big multinational company, dealing with it at the plant level, dealing with it at the employee level, because employees, by and large, don't want to work for bad companies. And that's one of the reasons companies engage in these things, one of many. But it's like, we don't want our employees embarrassed to say they work for us.
Right.
And there have been a lot of companies, that was the case. And I think if you can get to know them as humans, don't go in their face and yell at them. Maybe someday, if they just not being part, cooperative or collaborative. But this stuff changes people to people. And that's through relationship, and that's through connecting, and that's through understanding, and that's through listening as well as talking. And that's, I think, the opportunity and the invitation, the activists. I'm not saying you don't go after the C-suite and rappel off their headquarters building or whatever you want to do, or deal with their stocks, shareholders, whatever it is. But I think in terms of actually getting people to say, hey, come on over at our side of town. Come on over. I want to show you this factory. I want to show you this family. I want to come over. We'll make lunch, And I think that there will be some employees who will listen. Some people who saying, yeah, I live in this town too. I've never been to that side of town. Help me understand what the issue is, because I thought we were doing all right. I thought we were doing the right thing. Show me something else that I don't know. It's scary. It's hard. It's maybe risky, but it's so amazing when those connections are made and when those light bulbs go off and when all of a sudden those switches flip and all of a sudden say, I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me take this back to my company. Let me see if I can help here. It's really tempting to want to go to the national level and the global level and go to take on headquarters. And I'm not saying not to do that. That's important too. But people-to-people connectivity, it's back to the storytelling thing, as I was talking about before. That's how change really happens.
I think that's a really empowering message, something that everybody can do, and to, again, introduce that human element into what's largely been dominated by science and business and ROI. So thank you for that. And I think it's really clear that at the crux of your belief system, businesses are this vital actor in the solution. And it's yes, and all of these other individuals and institutions. So I'm curious if you see strong parallels to how you've really helped businesses become those actors and applying that to other institutions like governments, universities. Like, is it the same way that they can sort of enter this dialogue and enter this work?
I mean, it can be. There's certainly some commonalities. Any big entity has energy, water, waste kinds of things. Obviously, a university is different from a hospital, is different from City Hall. But they each have different reward systems. For a university, it's going to be around. Money's always an object, but it's also around reputation. It's also around engaging students or meeting student expectations or exceeding student expectations. It's also about being a good community member. It's also about opportunities to turn everything into teachable moments, create an institute at the university that says, let's look at interdisciplinary, because this involves buildings and engineering, it involves biology, it involves
Right.
chemistry, it involves human resources, it involves finance, it involves marketing and communication. How do we tap into the various assets we have in the university, or frankly, in a government entity, to bring people together to create a more holistic approach to this? So, it's hard to come up with generalities about what works, but they're all people too, right?
Right.
And everybody has a reward system. Everybody has a place that you can touch them intellectually or emotionally, or as humans, in whatever way it works. But I think there are opportunities all across the spectrum. We need everybody. We need government. We need NGOs across the political spectrum, from the most activist to the most mainstream. This is an all hands on deck moment. So we all need to lean in as hard as we can.
Mm-hmm. I love that message of inclusion, that everybody can contribute something, and you can't do everything, but it's about creating that collective and inviting people in. So you've given us a really great kind of foundation, what's been done, what's worked. You've shared what can we do about it as individuals in the systems that we're living in. I want to conclude with some of the reflections you have across the course of your career. You have a head start on many of us, having been able to shape and think through and reflect and digest. So what do you think we're missing? What's kind of the one thing everybody's overlooking? I have my thesis in terms of the justice aspect of our work, but curious what you think we're overlooking.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things. I mean, determination, patience, good communication skills, following the money. Those are all things that need to be, that are needed. There's a tendency to just say, I'm right, we believe in this, and it's right, and it may be right, and it may be actual science-based beliefs, and therefore we're going to yell that thing as loudly as we can until things change. Sometimes that works, but more often it's much more challenging. That's, I think, the big aha for me in this field, is that change is really, really hard and slow and complex. We all like the idea of change. I like to say that when it comes to change, we love the noun but hate the verb, right? We all like the idea of change, but actually changing isn't so easy. Obama back in 2008 ran on change as a question. That was the noun, but when it came to actually the verb, making change happen, it was not so easy, and not necessarily his fault. And we see that across, throughout history. And so, I'm 30 years into this, and we're just now starting to see the progress that I'm hoping to see, and it's still not where it needs to be. And at some level, that's kind of sad that it's taken so long. And on another level, that's kind of hopeful. And I'm not saying it'll take 30 years. We don't have 30 years. But what we do have and need is just persistence, patience, and determination, but also understanding that if you just yell the same thing over and over and expect a different result, it's kind of the Einstein definition of insanity. And so how do we engage people as humans? Sometimes facts are the way, sometimes facts aren't the way. And learning what really works in case by case, sometimes person by person basis. That's what takes patience. That's what takes time. And making change happen requires both of those things.
Yeah, such important messages, and I think they're beautiful in their simplicity. Some of my favorite takeaways from what you've shared has been being inclusive. Let's not sit at opposite ends of the spectrum and yell at each other and hope that miraculously we'll tip to one place or the other, but really about finding that bridge. Thank you. Now we need more, and embracing the power of storytelling, and also that comes from making human connections. A good story is not about numbers and data, right? You have to introduce that human element into it. And then I think to recognize that the work ahead of us is hard, but that there is a lot of community and leaders and lessons from the past that we need to apply immediately. And if we do those first two things right, then we'll see that change happen. So been really incredible to get a window into your experience, and so appreciative that you're sharing this with lots of eager listeners who can put this all into practice. So thank you so much, Joel.
It's my pleasure, B. And by the way, go to greenbiz.com. It's free. There's lots and lots and lots, thousands of stories of companies doing things, thousands of analysis of what's going on out there, lots of videos of interviews we've done at our events, and lots of free resources. 6 different weekly newsletters you can get. So check it out.
It's an amazing resource and organization you've built, I think, to create connections, interdisciplinary. That's how we met, and I think it's a wonderful platform to share more of those stories. So thanks again.
Thank you.